So in the last video, we mitigated the risk of a snowy runway to an acceptable level by plowing the runway, and we moved the hazard then into the safety assurance component for continuous monitoring. Safety assurance monitors the performance of a system. In the safety assurance component, we monitor the performance of the system. We ask, how well are the controls working? Let's step through the elements of the safety assurance component to show you how that works. In safety risk management, we made a decision to accept the risk that's in safety risk management. We made a decision here in risk assessment to accept the risk and move it on over to the safety assurance component for system monitoring, because once we accept a risk, we do not just forget about the hazard. It goes out of that risk assessment and into system monitoring. That's the first element under safety assurance. In this element, we describe how we are going to monitor the process and operating environment. In that, we are looking particularly for changes that introduce risk and degradation of existing controls. This element will articulate how we are going to monitor the system, analyze the system for safety compromise, and how we are going to decide whether the risk remains at an acceptable level and it doesn't creep. After system monitoring, where we describe what the safety assurance process will look like for that particular hazard, we go out and get data to see if the control is working. This is in the second element of this component. This list that we're going through sounds a bit academic, but it's really straightforward. In our scenario, for example, under number 1, you check to make sure the snow plowed the runway thoroughly and didn't miss spots. And number 2, you keep an eye on the weather. Check to see if it is snowing again, refreezing, etc. Number 5, for example, if there's a mishap on the runway, you determine the cause and see if it had something to do with the act of plowing the runway. Your PowerPoint presentation goes into more detail on this list, but as you gather data, we'll continue moving through the elements of the safety assurance component here. As you gather data in that second element, we go into the third element under safety assurance and we analyze the data. Again, this is an academic list or process, but your PowerPoint will go into greater depth on each step in the process. But essentially, in this element, you organize and examine the data to make safety-related decisions. Examine the data individually and corporately, and you're looking for systemic trends. Remember that safety management systems is a decision-making tool. All that we have talked about so far in this video is designed to get us here, to the element of system assessment, where we make a decision as to whether the system is performing as expected. Specifically, if the hazard control, that is plowing the runway, is working, we're checking to see if that's working to keep the runway from being slippery. We can go in one of 3 directions from here. If the data shows that the plows are completely plowing the runway, weather is not changing, and users of the runway indicate that it is not slippery, we can determine that the controls are working. And if the controls are working, we will continue to monitor it. If, however, we find that the performance of the control system is not acceptable, say, for example, the snowplow operators are missing a section of the runway, we move then to corrective action and we find out why. Say we learned that the operators need more lighting to properly see where they're going. We implement the change in corrective action and then we continue to monitor the system. The third option for our decision making comes when we discover through the data and safety assurance either that the desired results are not being obtained, say for example the runway is plowed but it's still slippery, or new hazards are identified. Say while plowing the runway we learned that the trucks were leaving debris behind them on the runway. In this case, a new hazard has been identified and the process goes back to the safety risk management component for a new risk analysis and assessment, so decisions can be made then on how to ensure the system operates as safely as possible. And the main goal then of the safety assurance component is to help us monitor the system's performance in a changing environment to ensure those risk controls continue to be effective and to look out for new hazards.